This episode of The Energy Show is proudly sponsored by Sunlight and Power, the Bay Area's leading commercial and residential solar contractor. SLP has been designing and installing photovoltaic, battery backup, and solar thermal solutions since 1976. Help fight climate change. Go solar with Sunlight and Power today.
So, you want to save the world with clean energy? Make money doing it? Confused about the economic and technical realities of residential and commercial solar, batteries, heat pumps, EVs? Want the real-world scoop on new energy technologies, not manufacturer hype? Then tune in to the Weekly Energy Show, hosted by Barry Cinnamon. Insights from Barry's 40-plus years in the solar and energy industry will help you understand the future ways we'll generate and consume energy. And now, here's Barry.
Welcome to this week's Energy Show. This is the second of 2 episodes with Nico Johnson, the most knowledgeable, most prolific, and most articulate podcaster in the solar industry. My first episode with Nico focuses on his journey from solar installer to solar equipment sales and marketing, and ultimately to the host of the popular SunCast series with over 800 episodes available in the cloud. On this episode, we'll be exploring the strategies and tactics that companies can adopt to cope with changes to the solar tax credits, to tariffs, and state policies. So, as you know, 2025 is shaping up to be a good year for solar. Not fantastic, but pretty good. Even with high interest rates and net metering changes, the industry has a way of coming back. But there's a big rush to finish projects and get the tax credit, because that's scheduled to end at the end of 2025. But buckle up for 2026. We're going to be encountering the likely elimination of solar tax credits. And as we do this podcast, those tax credits are supposed to be canceled by Congress, both Republicans in the House and in the Senate. So tax credits will be eliminated. That's coupled with high tariffs, especially for batteries and inverters. And then confusion with this thing called FEOC, Foreign Entities of Concern. There's regulations that may just disqualify certain components of systems if they're made in the wrong country. In a nutshell, the federal government's not just canceling the IRA, but they're being actively hostile to the clean energy industry. So the solar coaster may go off the rails for the first time. It'll come back, but it's going to take some recovery. But the good companies, especially those that plan and are nimble, will survive. You got to do contingency planning and careful cash management. Those are the key things for survival. There's a gathering storm. You're in touch with people throughout the industry. What do you hear what do people think is going to happen?
I'm glad you asked me this question because it's one that I get text messages, phone calls. I'm now going to a lot of these conferences on a regular basis, and people walk up to me thinking that because I have access to a lot of folks, I probably have gotten like insider information. I haven't. I'm not as involved in SIA as I ought to be, and I'm going to say that frankly because I want to be more involved, but I also am so hyper-focused right now on building and maintaining my small business. 2025 has been hard for everyone, and not the least of which to those of us that are in marketing. Marketing is the first place where people cut money, right? So I like to joke that 50% of the people who promised me I was in their budget no longer have a job, and the other 50% no longer have a budget.
Painful.
Right? I don't complain or cry about that because every one of those companies is making a practical decision, and if I were their advisor, I would give them the same advice. Everyone is cutting back. The reality is that we have lost the narrative as an industry to oil and gas, who are spending 10, 20, 30x more than us, lobbying. We've got to get a collective voice. Presently, that collective voice is bifurcated into residential and utility. And maybe community solar sort of spans the gap there. So you got SIA, which used to be all utility, now focused almost exclusively on resi. And you got ACP, which used to be all wind, focused exclusively on utility scale, and like solar is in there.
And then you've got the state organizations, which are mostly residential also.
That's correct. Mostly residential. And everyone operates in their own silo, right? By and large, I don't think it would be honest to say that ACP and SIA are walking hand in hand up on Capitol Hill, right? They have different interests. But as an industry, and we have a visibility problem, okay? And whether the ITC stays or goes, doesn't matter. We still have a visibility problem. When we are winning, you will see Matthew McConaughey's next movie, he's moving into his new house in the neighborhood, and an aerial shot flies over, and there's solar on 75% of the houses. Okay? Probably it's in Sacramento. And then, by the way, next door, a Cinnamon Energy truck is sitting casually on the curb, and a crew is on the roof. They're installing yet another solar project. McConaughey and his family never mention it. It's not a part of the storyline. It is ubiquitous. It's just
reality.
There. It's just there. It's the reality. Because lo and behold, that is our present reality in many cities in California, in lots of cities in New York, lots of cities in Texas, lots of cities in Florida, my home state of North Carolina. Solar is ubiquitous. But because it's up on the roof, it's not very visible. Okay? So we will be winning when that happens, when we see that it's being written into scripts in Hollywood. We see that more than Coldplay will stop a concert and talk about their climate activities, right? Their climate action-oriented activities. And when we win that narrative in the entertainment segment, and it's more than just, one or two entertainers who embrace it, like Ed Begley Jr., then the notion of this will be ubiquitous. Now, you asked about what's going to happen. I don't have a crystal ball, but I do talk to a lot of folks who secretly are saying two things. One, the financing and the sales orgs have driven the residential industry into ruin because of, I'm going to say, usurious, exorbitant pricing. Okay? Now, I'm not endorsing that people are saying this, but I do think that as I've observed the industry over the last 7 to 8 years, I would have to agree that on the outside looking in, I've looked at no specific quotes and validated for myself, but enough people have come to me and said, Nico, this is my observation, that it seems to me that it's plausible that dealer fees and sales commissions are exorbitant and that they take into consideration nothing related to protecting the homeowner. Yeah. Okay? It's just like, what is the most capitalistic thing we can do right now? It is to not leave money on the table. And there's all these fat incentives. And so we're going to rake in all of those incentives and take advantage of all of them in the name of deploying as much solar as possible, because we're going to sell it like a car. We're going to give you your monthly payment. That's all you want anyway. And we're going to keep the rest. Okay. I think that secretly, a lot of folks in the industry are saying, thank God that era might actually be over. And if it takes the ITC dying for that to happen, so be it.
Here we are. It's middle of June. The latest on Capitol Hill is that the residential 25D credit out of the bill, the 48E credit for leasing and commercial out of the bill. But I expect, and this is based on what lobbyists are saying, is that 48E, there'll be something there.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons why there's going to be some incentives there is the utility industry. It's huge. They're relying on this.
Yeah.
The residential industry is kind of small. So I think, the financing companies may luck out that 48E is going to stick around, and they'll be able to, if not get a long-term extension on the leasing and the PPAs, maybe a slowdown of 2 or 3 years.
So here's what I've heard on that end, and I think that it was the ultimate rug pull for Congress to take 48E. I genuinely was aghast, because the one thing you don't expect is that Congress would stick the middle finger up to Wall Street. And 48E did not exist for the homeowner. It existed for Wall Street. It existed for the sole purpose of transferring those tax credits to bankers. Okay? So what I have heard is if 25D is preserved in any sense whatsoever, it'll be through the end of 25. So December 31st, it's gone. And I'm going to tell you right now, if you're building a residential business right now, you cannot count on 25D past December 31st, if you can count on it at all. Just get used to it. We should consider ourselves extremely fortunate. And this is the insidious genius of Congress right now. Because if you had imagined, if I had said this to you 3 months ago, we should consider ourselves lucky if we have 25D past December, you would have said, that is a load of crock. What a crock, Nick. How can you be so glum? And yet, they've anchored so far to the right that we feel like we've saved something to keep it to the end of the year.
We feel like we saved a little bit.
Right.
But, Ron Resch and I were on a podcast January.
Yeah.
And we were talking about this. And Ron and I fought really hard to get the original 25D.
Yeah.
And it was a battle to get 25D. Yeah. The word in Capitol Hill was, the residential customers cheat on their taxes. We're only going to give tax credits to companies.
Right.
And we finally managed to get over that. And, it got passed in 2007 or so.
So
that really took off.
Yeah. The other thing, and this is 48E, I'm hearing that if they extend it, we should be lucky to see it extended to 28. And the more likely scenario is that it'll sunset at the end of 26. So my fingers are crossed that it'll sunset 28, which, lo and behold, was the original timeline, right? So it kind of reverts back to what we originally had, and it'll sunset in 28 latest. So if you're building a business around anything later than 28, it's a pipe dream. I think that the more plausible scenario, because of how hard they anchored to the right, is that we'll get 48E through the end of 26. And then, I don't know if you want to talk more about FEOC and things like that, but I think that there's a lot of, as you rightly put it, confusion around.
Yeah. The FEOC is almost too complicated to explain. I mean, I haven't seen anybody say this is how we're going to straighten that thing out. So what is the impact if 48E is terminated in 2026? What are you hearing about residential PPAs and leasing right now?
Yeah, well, I think it would be interesting for us to share, and I'm curious your perspective and take on what the folks at Ohm Analytics are projecting, because what we're hearing is that we're going to see between a 30 and 70% reduction, depending on which state you're in, of total volume, and that it will slowly increase back to it will sort of claw back over the ensuing 2 or 3 years an additional sort of 30% market gain again, but never back to sort of the heyday. There's a couple of things that are really ironic about the whole tariff situation, and FEOC in particular, is this entire domestic battery or domestic manufacturing is something that was the brainchild of Republicans and in many ways championed by the first Trump administration. And this is Trump getting what he wanted. And now, I'm trying to think of a better term than stepping on his own dick. And now, like, he can't get out of his own way because these tariffs that are being imposed, and especially FEOC, which is just in its own way a real cluster, it makes every single aspect of domestic manufacturing more expensive.
Yeah, and it's really going to get applied directly to clean energy because,
Yes.
in terms of the Trump administration, clean energy is the green new scam.
Yeah.
So anything related to clean energy, bad, and that attitude is really taking root on the Republican side.
Yep.
I don't see any way to change it.
But tariffs on steel, tariffs on everything, every component going on.
But they're making exceptions for the auto industry. As God is my witness, in order to go drill,
And the
baby, drill,
semiconductor.
they're going to make sure that drilling pipe steel is not
And the
applied to
semiconductor
drills.
industry
Yep.
will ultimately get.
So it's
concessions.
good. What I'm hearing on the residential side is even the residential PPA and leasing financing right now, the lenders are tightening up. There's not as much tax credit money available, so they're not putting together new funds.
Yep.
Nobody wants to finance anything if it can't 100% get installed and interconnected by the end of the year. And here we are in June. That's a really tight deadline.
It's an unbelievable deadline. For the most part, utility scale projects operate on a 3 to 5 year timeline, best case. And from the time most of these these projects get NTP, it's still on the short side, 6 months construction cycle. On the long side, 2 to 3 years construction cycle. Okay. The funny part is that at the current $65 a barrel, there is not a single company in the oil and gas industry that will expand production because they are barely covering production. Right now, the marginal cost to produce a barrel of oil is about $65. So maybe in the Permian, where you've got some cheaper fracking costs, you can have some profit. The oil and gas industry is not incentivized to drill, baby, drill. And if we think that the industry is going to grow and serve all the AI loads and data loads through natural gas, it would take till 2030 to put into operation to place 50 gigawatts of natural gas.
You can't even get the turbines for 5 or 6 years.
That's
and then
right.
you've got to build that plant. So that is one of the sad things about the loss of the solar industry, which really can deliver power locally.
Absolute
very quickly.
fastest way. Yep. Absolute fastest way to deliver local power.
Yeah. All right, so let's kind of take this a little bit further. So what should businesses do, whether it's residential, commercial, or utility scale? What are some of the coping strategies that you see out there for companies that aren't just, giving things up and know that they want to continue to run a business next year?
Do you remember 2009, 10, when our friends at Southern Energy Management were going to merge with Sunlight and Power? Remember that? I think what we're going to see is massive consolidation of the industry. we've seen this cycle. I've seen it twice in my career. Mm-hmm. So what I would do is instead of trying to find new markets, I would buy new markets. Instead of trying to build a sales team, I would be buying a sales team. The smart companies right now have already gone and secured capital, and they're financed. I had this conversation so we look at the sort of the large scale side. The folks at Aspen, I had Jorge on, and the folks at Encore, I had Chad on. Both of them have taken huge sums of money from major capital partners like Brookfield and Carlyle, right? So since this time last year, they were working on these credit facilities, closed in January and February respectively, $250 and $300 million respectively, to go acquire what they need to be successful, which may include companies, but certainly include projects. And in February, both had already placed their safe harbor purchasing, right? I was talking to a friend of mine who I worked with at Trina, who now is working at a transformer company, because there are certain bottlenecks that are inevitable.
Yep, transformers are one of them. There are some really good transformer companies, and he said he was talking to some folks that were saying, hey, give us a few weeks to figure things out. And he said, good luck. In a few weeks, my capacity will be sold out. So what I'm saying here is no matter what industry and resi, commercial, utility, now is the time to do two things. Cut back to only the absolute necessary staff that you need and be extremely decisive. You do not have the luxury to wait. You need to make decisions now, and you need to make them confidently and concretely. You need to figure out a safe harbor strategy. You need to figure out how to get to 5% project completion so that you can carry your projects into the next year. And even residential, by the way, like this is going to be a strategy that Sunrun is already figuring out, right? Sunrun's definitely already figuring it. TJ already has a plan for how Complete Solaria SunPower is going to do this. Barry has already thought through, like, how am I going to satisfy my customers? How am I going to finance their projects? Who are my partners going to be? And I really believe that the strong companies right now are going to hunker down. They're going to be the regional players like you, like my new friend Dan down in Florida at Lunex. They're market leaders, even if the market is their zip code. They're going to dominate the local airwaves with only the marketing spend that they can afford. And they're going to ride this through. I think it's going to be like 8 to 12 months of real serious turmoil. And then we're going to start to see that growth period again. And with that, I'd like to hear your thoughts on what you saw from the Analytics data. But I really think that you have to be decisive. You have to pick your partners well, and you have to cut all the fat. There can't be any fat right now. Fascinating. We're talking about making those decisions and decisive. I have weekly staff meetings, and I'm planning this thing out. I'm kind of discussing with my top level team. I don't want to scare the whole company, but it's very, very hard for people who haven't been in business for a long time to really understand this is what's going to happen, because we've seen it. And this is what we have to do, and it's painful. So we're looking at the same situation.
Right.
The Ohm Analytics conversation on Friday at the EcoFlow Summit, terrific. Those guys got their act together. But they're talking about 40 to 60% decline. I'm just figuring 50%.
Yeah.
And the companies, and they mentioned this also, companies that are doing commercial and residential installations in areas where electric rates are high, and where there's a lot of sun, they can actually do okay. They can survive. Florida, California, they'll survive. Companies that are doing utility scale, a lot of those projects are going to die, but the utilities need the power anyway. I don't care what the contract says. The utilities are going to have to sign up for more.
You're going to see some renegotiated PPAs with the really strong players. I actually think community solar is going to do extremely well.
Do you know what's happening to community solar in California? I've been watching this for, almost 10 years. It makes so much sense. It started in Minnesota, but it's really expanding everywhere. It doesn't work in California. The reason is that the IOUs just basically refuse to do the interconnection. They'll come up with a zillion reasons. That's why California is at the bottom of the list. Once again, it's an competitive action that
Right.
the utilities are taking. Community solar is one of the easiest ways.
That's right.
The best ways, the cheapest ways to get power to middle and low income
Yeah.
people. People living in apartment buildings. There's not enough roof space,
Yep.
but you've got that parking lot. You've got that other green field. You've got warehouses nearby. That makes so much sense. But in California, it doesn't work because the utilities basically come up with excuses up the yin yang to not do the interconnection.
Do you know when I learned the business model of community solar? This is when I really agreed. J.W. Postal said on my podcast, all the way back in like episode 100 something, that community solar was the fourth vertical, right? Because we have the classic resi, commercial, utility. Community solar is the fourth vertical. And I felt like it was really prescient. And I started using that terminology ever since then, because when I realized the economics, Barry, I came out of the C&I space, right? You get an anchor tenant, Target, you name it, like it's a retail anchor. They commit to enough to cover the base of the project that you need to commit to start the project. Then you get a good aggregator, someone who's going to get you subscribers. And that anchor tenant is going to pay you a lower rate. They're going to pay you, let's call it 8, 10, 12 cents a kilowatt hour, like some low rate. Let's call it 8 cents a kilowatt hour. And on balance, you're going to get, so like 20, 25% is an anchor tenant. It used to be much larger. Now you don't need it because the aggregators are really good at getting subscribers. So 75% is going to, this is like balancing your equities portfolio. 75% of the people paying into this community solar park are going to be paying at their retail rate. So what do you need in Illinois? You need a guaranteed discount. I think it's 10%, something like that, right? Off of what? 20 cents? Okay. I'll take
no-brainer.
18 cents a kilowatt hour. That's why so many people ran to Puerto Rico. When I was at Trina, there were the alternative cost, the avoided cost for a residential homeowner was 32 cents a kilowatt hour. They would gladly pay 20 cents a kilowatt hour for PPA, right? So community solar makes all the sense in the world, because even in a world where you don't have an ITC, you have a blended cost at utility scale and a blended price at residential. It's a brilliant model where you're averaging, I haven't seen the exact numbers, but let's call it 13, 14 cents a kilowatt hour. And you're building the same exact plant that you would sell energy to a utility at 3 cents a kilowatt hour.
Yep. It makes sense.
10 cents more.
But we've got to fight with, it's going to work in deregulated markets. I expect it's going to take off more in
That's
Texas,
right.
et
That's
cetera.
fair. Yep.
But where you've got regulation like here,
Yeah.
it's really, really so.
That's right.
So I'm kind of looking at some of these, the long-term strategies are good. One of the presentations that I gave at the most recent NAPSEP conference was kind of general business coping strategies.
Oh, yeah.
Forget about the solar business. What happens, whatever business you're in, you see a cliff coming. What are you going to do, and how are you going to keep going?
Yeah. Are you asking me? Because I remember you gave the lecture on this. I want you to teach. You've been in business much longer than I have.
So the answer is you really have to make sure that, why do businesses go out of business? They run out of money. They run out of cash.
That's right.
Now, if you have a loan, that's going to be some money. But if you have to pay that loan back and you're not able to kind of build the profits to do that, the bank's going to take your house.
That's right.
That's the way, residential small companies always have to sign their house over to the bank in order to get any kind of capital. So you have to make sure that your debt is under control. You have to keep a sharp eye on the gross margin. And I kind of took my eyes off the ball on that, before in the past. We're watching it like a hawk because we're targeting a 40% gross margin. If we have a 33% gross margin, the profits aren't there to keep the business going. So we're always focusing on that. And it's a challenge because the way you build that gross margin up, the easiest way is to raise prices. You're competing against other companies that are struggling to pay their bills,
right?
And they're cutting prices so that they can just keep that cash flow going. It's killing. So big lesson, don't follow a crazy competitor. But the most important thing is, don't take out debt going forward into 2026. And you hit the nail on the head. Make adjustments quickly and be decisive.
Yeah.
That's a hard thing for employees to digest. It's not hard for you and I to understand because we've just seen these things going on.
That's right.
And the third thing is try and diversify.
Yes.
There's some obvious places to diversify. The most obvious is service.
Yep.
Because if you lose 25% or 50% of the solar companies, the people still have
stranded.
Solar on the roof.
That's right.
And they're going to need maintenance, and they're going to need batteries here in California when the metering goes away with the AB 942. Every time somebody sells a house, they're going to lose net metering. And the solution to losing net metering is a battery. So it's a bad thing that we're losing that net metering grandfathering. But ironically, it's going to be good for selling batteries. So you have to be diversified, able to move into those adjacent markets. The hardest thing I had to do at Cinnamon Energy is we decided to take a leap, not from something purely electrical, but into HVAC.
Yeah.
And now we can offer kind of complete electrification services. It's a pain in the neck. Installing HVAC equipment is more complicated than solar and batteries. Solar's easy. Batteries are complicated. Heat pumps are really, really tricky to do it the right way. But we're biting the bullet, and that's one of the ways that we expect to stay in business.
You know, one of the things that we also see that is not a part of your business, and I wonder how you feel about it, but all across, I met with the Summit Energy guys, Eric Israelson. These guys are just phenomenal young entrepreneurs in Boston area, Massachusetts. And they started Summit Roofing, and they are killing it. And it turns out roofing is a 35+% gross margin business and has been for years. It's a great business, and people need a roof, and they call you in emergencies. And it is a great complement to solar for a lot of reasons. And I see it in Las Vegas. I've got some friends out there who have started roofing as a component, Texas. And I wonder if this is a trend that we're seeing in California. When I started my company, one of my biggest competitors was a roofing company. And then I went to work for a roofing company, DRI. And I always wondered.
DRI, going way back with the laminates.
Yeah, that's right, the Lumeta panels. So, and I always wondered why roofers and solar folks didn't, like there wasn't a big merger. Yeah, obviously Peterson Dean had a big footprint in solar for a while. What do you think about roofing as a logical diversification strategy for solar companies right now?
It makes total sense, and sometimes I kick myself for not getting into the roofing business. I decided it's hard to do roofing. It's a different crew. It's a different level of safety. It's a different, whole marketing strategy. I decided to go into heat pumps, but the second choice was really doing roofing.
Right.
It makes sense, and some of my competitors are doing roofing, and God bless them, they're doing fine. So it's a really good match with solar.
Yep.
It doesn't really enhance things with batteries and service and things like that. It's a good strategy.
Yeah, I think that you're really smart to go into HVAC, by the way. You don't see a lot of the reverse integration. There's not a lot of HVAC folks coming into solar. I think it's increasing, but there are a lot of roofers getting into solar, right? Especially as you get big roofing suppliers like SRS and ABC getting into the distribution game. A lot more roofers becoming solar companies, and vice versa. I've spent a lot of time with the folks over at ABC, and they're very vocal to their solar companies. We can train you to become roofers. And so I think you're going to see a lot more of that. I really think it's smart that you include as a part of your strategy right now, despite the turmoil. One of the best ways is to improve. So how do you improve your bottom line without going and getting new customers? You get share of wallet, or you increase your price, right? And through smart strategies, you've been able to do both.
Well, the share of wallet just comes from the ability to have more things to sell to them. And that's the biggest click, and we're trying to get the word out to our installed base and thousands of people that have systems that we do HVAC also.
Right.
And it happens all the time where, an existing solar customer says, I want to get a battery, and then we go there and they're in the middle of putting in an HVAC system. So there's more marketing than it takes, but we're definitely getting traction with that. And the HVAC business, especially when it comes to heat pumps, that's going to continue to grow and grow and grow. So we talked about some of the bad news, talked about the strategies that companies take to kind of cope. What's the good news? The reason why you and I are in the solar industry, we're eternal optimists, sometimes cockeyed optimists, but there's a lot of good news about the way solar industry is going to continue to grow over the years.
Yeah. Do you remember The Matrix?
Which one? The movies?
The very first one, yeah.
The red pill or blue pill?
Red pill, blue pill, yeah. Do you remember when they were chasing Neo through the subway and he kicks Neo into the middle of the subway track, right? Neo's like trying to get his bearings, and the guy jumps down and he picks his head up and he holds his head up, and then here comes the metro. Do you remember what he says to him?
No.
He says, that, Mr. Anderson, is the sound of inevitability.
There was a lot of Mr. Andersons in that movie.
The solar industry is that train. There is nothing that can stop this industry because it makes sense. You could walk into any oil and gas company, any of them, and someone in their company right now is working on solar. Even if it's hidden behind all the walls and the veils. Halliburton set aside $300 million for innovation in clean transition. $300 million. They funded a division with more capital than most solar companies have.
They're planning for that transition.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, they're lobbying as hard as they can to
That's
keep their
right.
incumbent businesses
Why?
going.
Because stranded assets are real. They've invested a lot of money. It's because their spreadsheet tells them that it's still not time to let go of these assets. And they made a bet and they made a deal with the devil and they made a banking structure to ensure that these assets would get these yields and returns. And if they don't, then their stock price suffers and their shareholders suffer. And it's not that they don't believe as well that solar is inevitable. They just will push it off as long as they can.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And every single oil and gas company, I think about Shell, I think about BP, I think about Chevron, they've all had pretty big divisions in participation. I mean, some of them residential, lots of them utility scale. They all kind of downplay it.
Yeah. I think the other good news is that, especially with the renaissance in heat pumps and the diversification into electrification and the unbelievable price-driven competition for EVs, the expansion of EV charging, everything is becoming electrified. That only bodes even more strongly for renewable energy at a localized level. I'm excited about companies like Zendy that have products that can actually manage microgrids. I'm excited for companies like Create, Dean Solon, that are building these ecosystems around what he calls nanogrids.
What is Dean doing now?
So they created this company, Create Energy, that is basically productizing the entire energy product at a utility scale and at a nanogrid scale. I call it nanogrid. They did a project for, check this out, Barry. You know how long it takes, because you've done Andale solar modules. How long does it typically take to get through the UL process for a product? A year.
Typically a year.
Great. Dean met with Nissan, invented a product, and commissioned the project completely through UL, from a product from his head to installed and commissioned, 8 months. When you've got that kind of innovation happening at a nanogrid level, it just reinforces what I'm saying, that this is inevitable, because the fastest way to deploy electrons in the modern economy is a microgrid that has a hybrid of electric vehicles, natural gas, solar, like these hybridized systems with the smart AI controls of products like, I'm sure there are dozens, but Zendy is a brilliant one. They're doing a great job right here in San Diego that can control what talks to what, right? The utility. You've got, practically, I think John Engel was telling me 95% of the utilities work off of OATI's platform for energy trading, right? And that's heavily leveraging AI algorithms. I'm encouraged by what we're seeing with AI. Not only do I not believe that AI is going to be such the energy hog that it's going to be the downfall of our energy system, AI is actually smart enough to figure that out itself.
Yep. And
people say, oh, but it uses so much water. On the level, it actually uses less water than watching television for the average American. It uses less water than our telephone system, right? Because the water they're measuring is actually based on the energy consumption. And AI is still nowhere near the energy consumption, literally, of our television consumption. Okay? So I'm encouraged that, unlike television, which can't figure itself out, AI is actually learning how to make the whole process more efficient. And we see the efficiency scales of AI teaching itself how to not use so much energy, right?
Yeah, it's fascinating.
It is fascinating. And we are going to figure out hybridized systems and how to power this demand growth that we're seeing. And I also just believe in the human spirit of, I'm going to say like the American entrepreneurial spirit, that we know how to innovate our way out of problems. You're a great example of that, right? The tech bust led to you creating one of the early great solar companies and figuring out how to leverage the public markets to finance it. And that is really at the heart of American capitalism and ingenuity. I don't think that Donald Trump or any of his cronies can completely destroy that.
They can't destroy the fundamental economics of solar deploying electrons where we're using it.
That's right.
And they can't change the speed at which the solar industry can do that.
Yep.
And so that's going to continue to happen. That's why I'm optimistic. It's not the end of the world. We're going to go through a tough time. Good companies are going to survive.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think we need any breakthroughs. It's just more of the same thing we've been doing again and again and again.
Yep.
And so I'm very optimistic, long-term, optimistic, medium-term. The good companies are going to kind of get through this.
Yep. I think that what you guys were doing at Lowe's with your on-delay module in a box, I think we're going to see that again before 2030.
Yep. We're going to make sure that we're able to handle the National Electric Code issues with balcony solar. There's ways to get around that, and people are going to deploy this. I was reading about a company that's actually got portable systems that go on a driveway. And somebody, in my neighborhood, I saw this guy with a rack of solar panels. He was probably a DIY guy, but you can hook that up, and you can hook it up to a temporary battery. As long as you're interconnecting to the grid in the right way, or going into an islanding mode, then you're fine.
Yeah, I know you listened to it. I'll link to it in when we do this for SunCast. But I did a whole episode with Karen, my business partner, on balcony solar. I think there's a lot we can learn from Germany about this. I didn't even know this existed until Karen brought it to my attention. But the fascinating stat that came away from that conversation for me is deploying. If the government would invest in balcony solar, it would be like giving every homeowner a $1,000 stimulus check for the rest of their life.
Yeah. Yep.
A year.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's going to take, unfortunately, I think, for the next administration to come in 2029 for us to really, really see some changes. But in the meantime, economics are going to drive these things. That's all the time we have on this second episode with Nico Johnson, host of SunCast. Thanks to all of our listeners for tuning in. And if you missed any of these podcasts, please tune into the first episode with Nico Johnson, which focuses on his journey from solar installer to solar equipment sales and marketing, and ultimately to the host of the popular SunCast series with over 800 episodes available in the cloud. And for more energy episodes, please go to our website at energyshow.biz.
This episode of The Energy Show was proudly sponsored by Sunlight and Power, the Bay Area's leading commercial and residential solar contractor. SLP has been designing and installing photovoltaic, battery backup, and solar thermal solutions since 1976. Help fight climate change. Go solar with Sunlight and Power today.